your Bibles, will you turn with me very quickly to Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. It's a story of a point in the life of a man by the name of Jacob. And this is what it says. If we pick it up, Genesis chapter 32 and verse 24. It says, so Jacob was left alone. Jacob was left alone. Paul talked about being alone and just needing someone to talk to. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. This is all night. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the man asked him, what is your name? And Jacob answered, and the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. I'm going to call this Transition 2020. Transition 2020. I trust that you all had a great Christmas. I trust that you all had a great week. I had a brilliant Christmas. Had a brilliant couple of weeks. A few wee highlights, and one of them was going to see Star Wars with Judah and Eli. This is the last of the whole Star Wars saga, the rise of Skywalker. I remember as a young boy getting all this Star Wars stuff for Christmas coming down, and I had this Millennium Falcon and this AT-AT and all these figures and all this stuff, all to do with Star Wars. It was a brilliant Christmas. I've always loved Star Wars, and so being able to go to the cinema and with my two boys that are now at an age that I was whenever I was getting my Star Wars stuff way back then, and to be watching this last movie that will ever be made. There may, I'm sure, be a few wee spin-offs, but as far as the actual saga goes, this is the last one. And what I noticed, perhaps in this movie more than ever before, though you'd always noticed it before, but it's always about good versus evil. But there's a lot more deeper stories. And the stories are actually about the people themselves, about the heroes and the villains and about their journeys. And so you have, a way back whenever it started, you've got this young boy by the name of Anakin Skywalker. Anakin's just a young boy, but these other Jedis, they come in and they recognize him, that he could be a really good Jedi. The problem is that this young boy, Anakin, he's in slavery with his mother. And they're able to free him from slavery, but his mother must stay. And as this young boy Anakin grows and he's being trained to be a Jedi, he's fighting with something that has happened in his life, with something that has taken place in his life, with a young boy having to leave his mother in slavery. He goes back to get his mom, but his mom's dead. His mom's dying. She's in her last breath, and she dies. And he thinks to himself, I should have went back sooner. I should have freed her. And he's having to wrestle with what has taken place in his life with regards to what's taken place with his mother. And he gets angry at the whole situation. He gets angry at the man, at the Jedi Knight, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's training him up. He gets angry at him. And he begins to have this battle that takes place in his mind as to where his life is going to go. This is the battle that he must face. And depending on the outcome of the battle will depend on what road he will take. Sadly, he takes the wrong road. He's got the wrong attitude, and everything gets messed up, and he becomes what we know as Darth Vader. That's what he becomes, because he wrestled with these things that happened in his life before, and he couldn't come to terms with it. He has a son and a daughter. His son is called Luke Skywalker. And whenever we come to what's the second one? A New Hope and the Empire Strikes Back. Thank you, son. Empire Strikes Back. And it's in that moment where Darth Vader unveils himself as Luke's father, because nobody knows. He says, I am your father. And everybody's like, whoa, we didn't see that coming. And now Luke must battle and must wrestle with the fact that Darth Vader is his father. And there's this battle that takes place because Darth Vader is trying to get Luke to come over to the dark side. And Luke is saying, no, come with me to the good side. And there's this battle that takes place. But Luke must battle this in his own mind, of his history, of what has gone before. Luke's got a battle with it. And Luke overcomes and becomes the Jedi Knight that he was destined to be. In The Rise of Skywalker, you've got this girl by the name of Rey. And Rey must also battle her own demons. She must also battle her own history, things that have happened before. Because you've got this Emperor Palpatine, who is like the height of evil. He's the one that created Darth Vader. And she is Palpatine's granddaughter. And so she's got a battle with her family, with her history, with what has gone before. She's got to wrestle with this. And so Palpatine is trying again to get her to join him with the Sith and to dominate and to control the galaxy. And I love this moment in the movie where he has got all the power of the Sith. And he makes this statement as they are battling against each other. And she's also having to battle with the fact that this is her grandfather of everything that has gone before. Does she believe enough? Does she believe that she's equipped enough, that she's powerful enough, not only to defeat him, but to be who she is destined to be? That's the battle that is going on in this girl's mind. And as they're face to face, and Palpatine says to her, I am all of the Sith. In other words, I've got all the power of the Sith throughout all the history of the Sith, of the evil, of the darkness. I've got it all in me. You can't defeat me. I am all of the Sith. And she turns to him and she says, I am all of the Jedi. Unbelievable. Because in that moment, she recognized that despite her history, despite family, despite everything that she has been through, it's about who she is now in this moment in time. And there's a family history here with Jacob. You see, the story that we have read in Genesis chapter 2, in order to understand it, we've got to go back a few chapters. And to understand his life, let me explain it very quickly and very briefly. In Genesis chapter 25, you've got the birth of Jacob and Esau. And what happens is their mother, Rebekah, is pregnant with twins. And there's this wrestling that takes place in her womb. And Rebekah goes and inquires of the Lord, what is going on here? This is not just them kicking. There's something more going on. And God replies with an answer. There are two nations in your womb, Rebekah. And the younger will serve the older. No, the older will serve the younger. Because the way it should be is that the older gets the blessing. He gets everything. He gets the inheritance. But there's going to be a change around, God saying. They're going to wrestle with each other. But there's going to be a change around. And the older will serve the younger. And what happens is they are born. And Esau comes out first. Esau means red. And if you're reading the Old Testament, you come across the Edomites. It's a reference. They're the descendants of Esau. But then you have second coming out, holding on to the heel of his older twin brother, is Jacob. And Jacob means a supplanter, one who holds on to the heels of others, a twister, a deceiver. And Jacob would spend his life deceiving others, tricking other people, holding on to the heels of others, making gains out of other people. And so there's this moment in Genesis chapter 25 where, Esau is a hunter. He goes out and he's hunting game. That's how he lives his life. He's always out and about. He's in the fields. He's in the desert places and he's hunting. Jacob would be a stay-at-home son. He'd be at the house. He'd be cooking. He'd be baking. And he wouldn't really leave the tents that much. Two very, very different boys. Two very, very different young men. And there's this moment where Esau is out hunting and he comes home and he hasn't caught anything and he's starving. He's absolutely starving. And as he comes into the tent, Jacob has got some stew on the go. And Esau asks for some stew. Please give me some of your stew or I'm going to die. I'm absolutely starving. And Jacob twists things. Jacob then is holding on to the heel. Well, I'll give you some of the stew if you give me your birthright. And Esau thinks to himself, well, what good is it to me? I'm going to die anyway. I don't have anything to eat. And he sells his birthright to Jacob for stew, for a pot of stew, for a bowl of stew. And we got to be so careful as Christians that we have a birthright. We are children of God. We are heirs to a kingdom. Don't sell what God has given you for a pot of stew. Don't sell what God has given you as an inheritance, not just in eternity, but here on this earth as well, for something so lame. Value what God has given you. Value what God has placed inside of you. And so Esau sells his birthright to Jacob. A little bit later on, Isaac is their father. And Isaac is coming to the end of his years, and he's lost his sight. And it comes to the point where he must pass his blessing on to his eldest son. And he calls his eldest son Esau. And he says, go hunt some game, bring it back to me. I'm going to pass my blessing on to you. This was a big deal, church. This was a big deal. This is the blessing of Isaac, Abraham, and Isaac to be passed on to Esau. This was massive. And so Esau goes off to hunt game. But their mother hears what's going on. And she goes to Jacob and she says, listen, go you in and you get the blessing. And Jacob's like, but he's going to know. But they coat him in like goat's hair. And so he goes in. Isaac can't see him, but he's covered in hair because, Jacob was smooth and didn't have a lot of hair on his body. And Esau was all hairy. So they cover him in goat's hair. And he goes in. And Isaac thinks that it's Esau when it's Jacob. And he passes the blessing to Jacob. He's been holding on to the heels. He's been deceiving people. He's been tricking people. And he gets the blessing from Isaac. And as Jacob is leaving, having got the blessing, Esau's coming in. Esau brings what he's caught to give to Isaac, and he says, okay, Father, give me your blessing. And Isaac's like, I already give it to you. And Esau's like, no, I'm just here. And so there's confusion, like, well, who was that there? And then they discover it was Jacob. And Esau makes a declaration, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. He stole my blessing. Have you not got anything for me, Father? And Isaac's like, no, I've given it to him. I've given it to your brother. I'm going to kill him. And Jacob flees. Jacob goes to his uncle's house, to Laban's. And he's there for 20 years. And in those 20 years, he works for Laban. He wants to marry one of his daughters. And Laban deceives then Jacob and gives him the wrong daughter. And so he works for 7 years for the first daughter, works another 7 years for the second daughter, the one that he wanted to be with, and then works another 6 years. He's with them for 20 years in total. But he also then deceives Laban because he's looking after the goats and the sheep and that there, and he does this thing where he's actually building up his own herd of cattle, and Laban doesn't know about it. And after 20 years, he then has to return home. And he goes back. He's going back home to face Esau. Laban he doesn't even tell Laban that he's leaving. And Laban catches up with him and has a bit of an argument with him, but then sends him on his way. And it comes to this point here that we've just read, where Jacob has to go back and face Esau. And he's by himself. The reason that he's by himself is because he knows the last time Esau said anything, he was going to kill me. It's 20 years later. He probably still wants to kill me because what I did was a big deal. And so he splits his whole camp up, his whole family, splits everything up into two and sends them on ahead of him while he waits alone. And it's at this moment where Jacob is now beginning to think over his life, over what has taken place, having to confront the things that he's done, having to confront family, having to confront everything that has gone before, having to wrestle with that there. Before, he was able to in some way pull a move that would get him out of the trouble that he was in. But now it seems like there's no move that is going to get him out of this one. And he's at this point where the only one he can talk to is God. Sometimes that's not a bad place to be in, church. The stuff that happens in your life, as Jim and Izzy have testified about, as Paul has testified about, the stuff that goes on in your life will sometimes bring you, which should bring you to this point where it's just, God is my only answer. That's not a bad place to be in. The circumstances might be messed up. The circumstances might not be what you want, but the purpose of the circumstances is to bring you to God, is for God to reveal something more of who He is in you. John talked about having a revelation of God's love in your life. A lot of times that will only come through circumstances and trials and tribulations that we face. Listen, the stuff that happened to you in 2019 that dragged you down shouldn't have happened, but it's how you respond to the circumstances that matters. Anakin Skywalker responded in the wrong way and ended up becoming Darth Vader. And there are a lot of people calling themselves Christians, but they're Darth Vaders in the church. Evil. I use that word purposely. Conniving, evil, and deceitful. Wolves claiming to be Christians because of stuff that has happened to them that shouldn't have happened, but they responded in the wrong way. And they need a new, fresh revelation of the love of God in their lives, because God's love still stands even for them. And so Jacob comes to this point in his life where he must face his past, where he must face what he has done. A transition is about to take place in his life. And we come to a point now, today, for us, where it's not just about going into a new year, it's about going into a new decade. We think back about over the year, over the last decade, and maybe failures that have taken place in our lives, things that we've done wrong, things that have been wronged to us, against us. How do we respond? How are we going to transition into 2020? Jacob wrestled with God. That was how he was going to transition. And so he's alone at this moment in his life. And a man wrestles with Jacob. I'm not going to get into the theology of, was it God, was it Jesus, was it an angel, who was it? I believe that it was Jesus. I believe that it was God in the form of Jesus. And so there's this wrestling that takes place with God. We've got to wrestle. We've got to wrestle with our history. We've got to wrestle with our past. We've got to wrestle with things that have gone wrong, gone against us. The things didn't go quite the way we had hoped, the way we had planned, the way we had dreamed. And Jacob wrestles through the night until morning. And God says, let me go. He says, no, not until you bless me. I won't let you go, God, until I get an answer, until I hear from you, until you move in my life. The next couple of weeks are going to be restarting the seeking. And this is about pursuing God until we get hold of Him. Pursuing Him until we get an answer. And so Jacob, he wrestles, doesn't let go. God strikes his hip, knocks the joint out, blesses him, changes his name. This is the transition. You're no longer Jacob. You have a reputation. So whenever people mention the name Jacob, the first thing they think about is the deceitfulness that has taken place in your life, of how you have treated others. When people mention Jacob, this is what they think of. You are no longer that person. You are Israel. You are Israel. You are Israel. You have wrestled with God and with men, and you have overcome. You are Israel. I want to talk to the Israels in this place today. It's time to put Esau, it's time to put Jacob to death. It's time to put Jacob to death and to leave him here and to walk to transition into 2020 as an Israel. You are an Israel. There is an Israel inside every single person in this place. But you've got to wrestle with this. You've got to wrestle with Jacob. You've got to wrestle with his reputation. And you've got to put it to death. And you say, I am not that person anymore. I am a new creation in Christ. I'm going to transition into 2020 and into this new decade as Israel. There is an Israel inside of you, but you've got to wrestle with it to get it out. children of Israel are enslaved for 400 years. But God has called them into freedom, and he has set them up with a promised land. The promised land is Israel. But in order for them to journey, they had to wrestle. They had to wrestle with themselves, with their own attitudes, with their own behaviors. They had to wrestle with themselves. They had to journey through the wilderness, and then they had to come to Jericho. They had to wrestle in order to obtain the promises that God had for them. There is an Israel in you. You've got to bring it out. You've got to wrestle. As we transition, then we've got to leave this behind, and we've got to create a new reputation as Israel. One of the other movies that I watched over Christmas was The Croods. Anybody see The Croods? It's about this prehistoric family, and they live in a cave. And the father is saying, we've got to stay in the cave because there's safety in the cave. Outside, there's danger. There's safety in the cave, and his young daughter, she wants to explore. And there's this moment where she looks out, she's looking out of the cave, and she sees a glowing orange. It's fire. And she goes, she'd never seen it before, but she wants to leave the cave, and she wants to go to pursue that which she has seen. And there's this moment where you see her hand on the cave, on the entrance, on the door of the cave, and you see her hand pull away from the entrance because she's pursuing that which she has seen. The same thing happens with the father because he knows this is safety here, but I've got to leave this to go get my daughter. I've got to leave the cave. And so many of us live our lives in this safe cocoon or tied up and wrapped up in a reputation as Jacobs. And God is calling us in 2020 to transition and to walk into 2020 as Israels. As Israels. You're an Israel. There is an Israel inside of you. You've got to wrestle. You've got to bring it out. And I pray, I trust and I pray that as this church moves forward, that we will move forward as Israels. Not as Jacobs, but as Israels. God has called you Israel. He has given you a new name. Live up to that new name. Walk out your life with that new name.